Hey RC car fans, we're here today to discuss and show you the difference in suspension settings. The blue truck over here has the suspension set at a much less inclined position or more vertical. The red truck on this side is much more inclined, so it's call it more horizontal. What that means is for the red truck, it should make it more forgiving run. So when it's on rough terrain, it won't bounce around as much as the blue truck, which has the less inclined. The difference is the blue truck should have better handling on the road because it'll lean into the turns compared to the red truck. And we'll get to see that in the running videos. So we're going to zoom in here on some details and we'll show you what we're going to have. Okay, so we'll start with looking at the front of the vehicle. So on the blue truck, you can see where the A-arms are almost level with the ground. Now remember, this is the one that has the less inclined suspension, so it's more, your shocks are straighter versus on an incline. And if we look at the red truck, you'll see that it's actually more, you got a little more angle there. They're not really parallel with the ground. So it's sitting a little bit higher with the shocks at more of an angle, so they're actually almost more horizontal than vertical. Now, taking a look at the back, you can see the blue truck actually on the back end, again with the suspension more vertical, is actually a little bit more parallel to the ground than the red one. You'll see the red one actually sits up a little bit higher, or I'm sorry, a little bit lower. I like how the suspension arms are almost parallel to the ground. With the suspension on the blue truck set at a more vertical angle compared to the red truck, which is again more horizontal, I've put both trucks up on basically it's 3 stacks of the big Duplo Lego bricks, and you can kind of see obviously the blue truck looks a little bit lower to the ground than the red truck. And I'll show you that here, where if I take my little cardboard, I can roll that under the red truck and I don't touch the wheel. If I try to roll it under the blue truck, obviously I'm hitting the wheel and actually lifting the truck a little bit. So by having the suspension set more vertical, you get a little more ground clearance, but you actually get more squat. So now when this thing is taking off, the back end is going to tend to move a lot more compared to this one. So basically, if you have more anti-squat, tire traction because you get more weight under acceleration. And when you have less anti-squat, you actually accelerate faster when it's on a bumpy surface. So more anti-squat, better for the road, less anti-squat, better for bumpy surfaces. Now, the one thing you got to know is that setting your suspension this way, where you have more vertical versus more horizontal, yes, it looks like this one has more ground clearance, which it kind of does, but you don't set ground clearance by setting your suspension. You set your ground clearance by how spacers in the suspension, or if you have a threaded suspension post, by changing where your spring is. You don't actually change how well the suspension works. All you're doing is changing how high that's going to sit off the ground. So we'll move on to the next part and I'll show you in detail how we have this set. Okay, so on these AMP MTs, your suspension, your rear, this is the rear suspension post, has 3 holes that you can put your suspension in. You can see a little better on this side. So there's 1 hole, 2 holes, 3 holes. So to make this the more vertical setup, we went to the outside hole on both sides. Then on the bottom of the rear, there's 2 holes. So again, we're mounted on the hole that's closest to the center versus the one that's on the outside. So we've got that set on both for the outside or for the rear, and we go. So on the front, same thing, 3 holes, inside, middle, and outside. So again, to get this more vertical, we've put the suspension mounts all the way to the outside hole. And then on the bottom for the front, outside hole, inside hole. So again, obviously we've now moved that to the inside. So now on these AMP MTs, that is the most adjustment you can make on your suspension to get it more vertical or more horizontal. So now we're on to the red truck. So we're actually on the inside holes versus the outside holes. The blue truck we're set up all the way out here. The red truck we're set up on the inside. So again, both are set in what we call position number 1, and I'll show you what that means in a minute. And then on the bottom, we are set on the outside of the 2 holes. There's one here, you can't see the inside because it's kind of blocked, but we've moved this to the outside position. Then on the front, all the way on the inside position, whereas the blue truck is all the way out here on the outside position. And then at the bottom, you can kind of see here, we're set at the outside position versus the inside position. And that's what gives us that shock angle we've been looking at. One of the things I did was I created this setup sheet. Basically took the instructions and cut out some pictures and made a little spreadsheet to record what we've done. So as you can see, for this front suspension setup, the center hole on the top, which is 2, is the stock setting, and the outer hole on the bottom, which is number 2, is that gives us the stock setup. And that's typically what we run or have been running until this video. So we'll go back and probably reset it that way. On the rear, I also have it. So again, here, stock location is the center hole on the top and the outside hole, again, number 2 for the bottom. And that's typically how we have that set up. So we'll go back and reset that. The red truck has everything set to the inner holes. So the red truck is running in hole number 1 here, and actually hole number 2. So it gives us that steeper angle. Whereas the blue truck is running in, say, like hole number 3 and then hole number 1. Again, that's giving us that more vertical position. So on the red truck, we moved the suspension mount from the stock center hole to the inside hole. Problem with that is, the way the suspension and the shocks are set up, basically your shock housing hits this. So what we ended up having to do in order to get that screwed down is I had to put a filler, basically a spacer, which probably would have been better if it was washers. This was just something I had that worked. But we had to put a spacer in here in order to get that thing tightened down. Because you can kind of see from here, we're essentially touching that part of the shock post. So if you want to run with your front suspension in that innermost hole, then you're going to have to put some kind of spacer in there. Like I said, it seems to run really well anyway with the suspension set up in the stock setting, because of course Horizon Hobby knows what they're doing, and that's why they set it the way they did. So we're going to go ahead and put that back after the videos are done. So the other thing I want to mention with these trucks, when you watch the running video, keep in mind that pretty much everything is stock. It's the same stock Dynamite 20-turn motor, same suspension, same tires. The only thing we did was change the suspension angles. Slipper clutch setting is all the same, camber, everything is basically set the same way. So when you see how they run side by side, you'll be able to see what difference the shock settings actually make. So that's kind of the advantage of having 2 of the same truck. We can make these changes and you guys can see side by side what happens. And then eventually, once we start to do upgrades with lower turn motors, light bulb batteries, brushless settings, you can see them side by side and see how much of a difference that really makes. What we're going to do next is actually run these for you. We're going to run out in the middle of the street, and then we're going to run in the backyard. It's almost the end of January. We had a really cold early January, so the backyard it's starting to thaw out, but basically it was frozen and really, really rough. So it gives us a really good bumpy terrain. You can really see the trucks bouncing around on them. Out in the street, you can see, hopefully we'll get to watch, how the different shock settings actually affect the handling. So, and again, it's about 40 degrees outside right now, and we'll see what happens. All right, we are back from our run outside. As you saw from the running, out in the street, the blue truck really handled the turns a lot better. It could take the full speed turns a lot sharper than the red truck with that suspension setting. But you could also see a lot of body roll on the blue truck because, of course, the way that suspension is set, it lets that truck lean in a lot more, which also helps it get around those turns a lot quicker. Now in the backyard, the blue truck seemed to be a lot more bouncy. I think it was also a lot harder to control watching my son trying to drive. So obviously there's advantages and disadvantages to the setups. With the kind of running and places we do, we'll probably go back to the factory settings, maybe leave the rear suspension a little bit more on an angle in order to give it a little less bounce, but still give it good traction. Thanks for watching.